Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing Sheshet by the band Sheshet.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
Let me get this out of my stream because it sounds so odd to say Sheshet, 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 Sheshet. It's so odd. I really have no nice way of saying it like Sheshet or I don't know. Anyway, here's some of my favorite bits from this album. So this is the album. It's the album I was waiting for, and you must ask yourselves, why is this album one you've been waiting for so long? And I know a lot of you guys probably don't even know this album, but whenever in Israel you ask someone what do you think is like the best Israeli prog album of all time, it is most common for people to react to that question with, well, it's probably Sheshet's self-titled release from 1977, which is the album we're reviewing today. Now, the story of this band and this album is definitely quite the funky story, and it all started with one man, probably the greatest mind in progressive rock in Israel, called Shem Tov Levi. And at the start of 1977, Levi, who was already a very well-versed musician in the world of music as a whole and in progressive rock music in Israel, decided that he wanted to create a new progressive rock act. So firstly, in assembling this new band, he got musician Shmuley Karach, which is also a very well-versed musician, to come ahead and take bass duties in this new band. But then when choosing the other musicians, he went into a very interesting route and actually decided to take some players from the musical wing of the IDF. Now, the Israeli Defense Force, the IDF, has a musical wing, much like a lot of armies around the world. And well, today this army wing might be one of the lamest types of places, and not a lot of people have a lot of respect for the people who actually perform there. But back in the 50s all the way until the 80s, the people who were in the musical wing of the IAF were considered to be some of the best musicians, and most of them would go on to have very successful musical careers later on. And in his search, Shem Tov Levi got 4 additional players, the first one being Shlomo Budagov on guitars, the second one being Adi Renetta on the keyboards, Iki Levi on the drums, and maybe most importantly is Yehudit Ravit, which she was back then a very unknown singer but a very promising one, and he took her into this new band, and later on she would prove to be one of the most successful female vocalists and musicians in all of Israel. And thus would be formed this very interesting sextet. Now, the name in Hebrew for sextet is actually Sheshet, which is where the name of this band comes from, but the band members would also later recollect that their name was also inspired by the sidekick of Robinson Crusoe, the mythical explorer in the books. And this newly formed band would quickly be required to compose some of the soundtrack for a film called A Stretcher's Journey, and this would technically sort of be their debut music. And this would technically be some sort of their musical debut, and later on the band would work on more materials of their own, and they would work on ways to perform them, but unfortunately they were faced with many roadblocks, which ultimately actually led them to disband the same exact year. But not long after the band presumably disbanded and each one went his own separate way, the CBS record label actually approached the band and told them that they wanted to produce their album, so the band regrouped and they actually made this entire album on a very low budget and in a staggering time of only 3 days in the studio. Now when you go ahead and listen to this album, just remember the fact that it was made in 3 studio days. It is just incomprehensible to me. I can't understand how they did it. It is so luscious, colorful, all over the place, yet 3 days in the studio just makes no sense, honestly. And contrary to your expectations right now, the band didn't use this platform of a new debut album to reform. They actually decided to still stay departed and each and every one went his own way. And well, the album was released and seeing as it didn't really receive any kind of touring, it flopped pretty much majorly. Not a lot of people wanted to listen to this type of stuff, and honestly, I get them. Prog was on the decline, nobody really wanted to see this. It was even lucky for them to have CBS approach them in making this album in the first place. But this unsuccessful album at the start kinda grew more and more in popularity as the years went by, and from being a cult classic, this one actually became a very much Israeli classic of all time. And this is where we stand today, and finally I got to give it a listen, and I can definitely say that my wait wasn't in vain. This album was remarkable, and the thing which I really liked about this, and I've noted this in the past, a lot of the progressive scene in Israel is very much based on jazz fusion, and this one, while also having a lot of jazz fusion influences in it, is honestly a lot akin to eclectic prog as well, which is something that I definitely love, and I do think that this is the purest representation of progressive rock in the mainstream media of Israel. Each song on here is unique and brilliant in its own way. The 2 first tracks of Symbols and Aquarelle are just so good. I'm sure that viewers of this channel would find a lot to love in these 2, so if you want to go ahead, you can go ahead and listen to the 2. I'll just tell you this, Spotify doesn't have the version, or at least any version, of Aquarelle, so I listened to this album on YouTube, which is fine I guess, although not as favorable as listening to it on a good quality over on Spotify. And the 3rd track on this album is called All Thumbs Samba, and this one is a fine, very much samba-like, very Brazilian type of track, which is not only nice for it being very typo progressive and very fun, it has actually managed to become one of the staples of Israeli music as a whole, even in the mainstream view. The next song on the album is called 7/8, and you guessed it, it's correct, this song is in a 7/8 time signature, which is basically just the band flexing their muscles and showing what they can do in this very odd time signature, and it sounds absolutely brilliant, with each and every one getting his time to shine in the best way possible. Now admittedly after that, this album takes a slight dip into more contemporary type of music, but of course it ends off with 2 amazing tracks which come back to the progressive narrative, which I so love about this album's music. And when the final note of this album played, I was just left there thinking to myself, well, there's really nothing else to do, and I played it again. Yeah, it is such a nice album, very good listen. Even if you don't know the language being spoken, I'm sure that you'll find a lot to enjoy in this one, and thus I would rate it as one of the best, if not the best, Israeli prog albums I've ever heard. Wow, what a good album cover this is. Speaking about balance, composition, colors, whatever, this one has it all. On its surface, this is a simple as heck cover. It doesn't really have a lot about it, but this is also its magic. Each and every component of it, each and every element, subject is there for a reason, and there's not much more needed to encapsulate what this album and the album's cover art artist wanted to get. Firstly, you have the title of the band, which is written both in Hebrew and in English because of course this album was supposed to be successful on a nationwide scale, although it happened to not be, at least not at the start. And then of course you have the photo of the band, or should I say a sort of silhouette of the band members. There are no names, there are no faces, there's no way to identify each and every one. There are only 6 numbers on here, featuring the idea that they are all equals on here, despite having Shem Tov Levi at the front of it all, which would definitely make this album a lot more interesting for people who know Shem Tov Levi's work beforehand. They decided to go very low key. Each and every one on here is equal. Each and every one brings his own part into this album, and together they made something greater than the sum of its parts. And I love the fact that they used just numbers to represent the people, and they did so in a very interesting way, giving each one a very vibrant color and unique color in order to show that each and every one of them is definitely unique, as well as of course an equal. And just so you know, here is the original photo upon which this one was based. I think it's really nice. It looks kind of good. They're very similar, and there's really not a lot of reason to show you this other than just, you know, to get a sort of understanding of what these guys look like. But as a whole, I love this cover to bits. I think it's one of the best we've seen on the series so far, because it gets literally everything right. I think that this album is great, but currently it is lacking some sort of progressive memorability. While having a lot of progressive parts to it, it also has a lot of very accessible contemporary parts to it as well, and this kind of verges it on the place of being not that memorable when it comes to the prog side of it, but definitely memorable as a overall just enjoyable listen. So for now, I'm not gonna jump myself too much, and I'm gonna give this one a very high 8 out of 10. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to Heritage by the band Opeth. I of course want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay One, Arista Kings, and Lindsay Haycox. You guys are just the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.